Hi everyone! I decided to do my vlog on Joel Rhodes' Ghost Boys. As you know, we're looking at how paranormal activity functions within the text. I've chosen to look at how paranormal activity functions as a revision tool in the death of Emmett Till and the death of Jeremy in Ghost Boys. Before we get into a deeper discussion of the text, I want to start by talking about one of our secondary readings, Building Literacy Communities. So if you remember, the text talks about the difference between traditional history classrooms and how they can be enhanced by adding historical fiction to the study of history. So the original lesson plan was over the civil rights movement in South Africa, and it focused specifically on what the text had to say about it. But unfortunately, due to the number of events and years needing attention in such a short time span, the information is very general, limited to names, places, and dates, and does not allow students to explore certain topics. Now, I can personally relate to this quote because when I was studying history in middle school and high school, I often felt a disconnect between the material and myself. This was also shared with my fellow students, and we would often ask why we had to study history. And she told us, or one teacher told us, that we study history to keep tragic events from happening again. Now, this answer is very logical, but it didn't really answer our question because what we wanted to know is how it connects to us. Now, in the revision of the original lesson plan, the authors of Building Literacy Communities suggest involving historical fiction alongside a textbook in order to help students better connect with historical events. Involving historical fiction allows you to narrow your topic. So, for example, if we're talking about civil rights in the United States, we can look at the death of Emmett Till alongside Ghost Boys. And it's best to use multiple sources. So for this class, in the reading of Ghost Boys, we looked at building literacy communities. We read an article about the mother of Emmett Till, and we also looked at how you can involve controversial texts within the classroom appropriately. And in order to do this, you have to integrate critical literacy into the classroom. It can't just be about the book itself, it has to be about context. Why is this book significant along with what we're studying? So with Ghost Boys, the ideas would be the death of Emmett Till and how it's a revision of how history has traditionally discussed his death. Now, you can read the entire novels as we did for this class, or you can teach it in parts. Say if there's a few chapters of a book that will help students better understand civil rights, then that can be included in your multiple sources. It also helps you to emphasize historical points, like the death of Emmett Till, and it helps to promote adolescent connections because typically historical fiction is either written in the form of a diary or, in this case, from a first-person point of view. And often young adults historical fiction focuses on someone who would be about their age when they're studying the material. I personally feel like this would have really helped me better engage with history when I was a student because I would have been able to understand the relevance of the event with today. For example, Emmett Till's death is still relevant because of police brutality that happens in modern day life. And that's something that Joel Rhodes focuses on in Ghost Boys. Now, again, like I said, we're talking about paranormal activity. So I'm going to give a basic definition. Paranormal activity is something that is not scientifically explainable and something that is supernatural. With that in mind, we're going to look at how paranormal activity functions within the text. And I first want to start with a quote from Emmett Till's mother. She, she says, "When it comes to a lynching, it is not just the actual killers who are guilty. It is the dominant culture, the entire society that permits such a thing, that encourages it." Now, the dominant society that Till's mother is referring to is the dominant white culture, and particularly the Jim Crow era in the South. Jim Crow laws disenfranchised African Americans. They were not able to vote, even though it was their constitutional right, and often they would be brutally murdered in lynchings because of supposedly raping white women. Now, as civil rights activists such as Ida B. Wells informs us, often, more than not, it was not that they were having an inappropriate relationship with a woman, it was because they were involving themselves in politics, they were starting businesses that allow made it possible for them to take economic growth away from white businessmen, and for that they were punished. Now, in the case of Emmett Till, he was accused by Mrs. Bryant, the wife of one of his murderers, for making crude remarks and supposedly making sexual advances with her. Now, what I first want to emphasize is that Emmett Till was not even a teenager, much less a grown man. He was only about 12 to 14 years old. But Mrs. Brandt's accusations justified his murder in the eyes of his killers. Even though they admitted that they had kidnapped him, forced him out of bed at gunpoint, and brutally murdered him, they were found innocent and were not punished for their crime because they were seen as protecting Mrs. Brandt, or the white Southern woman. Now, in reaction to her son's death, Mammy Till wanted the world to see what she had seen. Even though she was advised against showing her son's body, she decided to have an open casket because she wanted the world to know what had happened to her son. Now, I'm going to skip ahead to the next slide for a moment because I want to talk about this picture of Emmett Till. So, I wasn't shown this when I was studying about the civil rights movement or learning about Emmett Till in middle school and high school. Unfortunately, he was taught in a way that he was just another name, place, and date to remember. But his mother did not want that to be the case. She wanted the world to know what had happened to her son. She wanted the world to see images like what I am showing you in this picture. Because the boy was brutally beaten, he was shot in the head, and he was weighed down in a river with a 75-pound cotton gin. Now, the Southern white men said that this was justified because they were protecting Mrs. Brandt. Now, in her text, Rhodes focuses upon a revision of what happened to Emmett Till, because as she shows within her text, Mrs. Brandt later confessed that none of her accusations were true. Emmett Till had not wolf whistled at her. He had not made crude comments, and he had not made sexual advances upon her. And she said she did not believe that he deserved the death that he received. This is important because this affects the way that we should look at the text. History books often, unfortunately, just give you the basic facts. But his death spurred a lot of activism with the civil rights movement. For example, I did not know the connection between him and Rosa Parks until college. In high school, I was taught that she was an elderly woman who did not want to give up her seat because she was tired. But in truth, she knew exactly what she was doing. Emotionally affected by the death of Emmett Till, and thinking of him, she refused to give up her seat. The revision of Emmett Till's death is very important within Ghost Boys because Jewel Rhodes focuses on the idea of truth, particularly when she's talking about the death and court case of Jeremy. So during the court case, Jeremy listens to Officer Moore's answers on the stand, and he can't help but ask this question. When truth's a feeling, can it be both true and untrue? Now, the reason Jeremy asked this question is because Officer Moore states that he was afraid for his life. He described Jeremy as a big, bulking black man, and he was scared for his life. Yet, he's surprised when the prosecutor informs him that Jeremy was a 12-year-old boy who was the same size and height of his daughter, Sarah. This court case contains evidence that proves that Officer Moore was lying. Sarah watches a video of the murder of Jeremy, which would have been presented during the court case. This video shows Jeremy running around holding a toy gun, her father shooting him. Yet, Officer Moore never got out of his car. He never told Jeremy to halt. He never told him to lower his weapon. In fact, he never looked at Jeremy's face. He shot him in the back. What's more, he did not even call an ambulance because he thought he would be in trouble for negligence. Within this text, Jeremy is able to communicate with Sarah and Emmett Till. Emmett Till tells his story to Jeremy. You could also say he shows it to Jeremy because we get into Emmett Till's mind when this story is told to Jeremy. And the way that this is told connects to the idea of paranormal activity because he enters into Till's mindset as he interacts with Mrs. Brent, as his friends react to their interaction, and also the kidnapping and brutal murder of Emmett Till. We also enter into Jeremy's mind as he is shot by Officer Moore. We learn that he was playing with a toy gun given to him by his friend at school, and ironically, he was playing cops and robbers. He was imagining himself as a police officer who was shooting at criminals and trying to protect his community. His connection with Sarah is also very important because it is meant to create change. Sarah is greatly impacted by learning about the death of Emmett Till and Jeremy. She is impacted by their communication and watching her father on trial that will determine whether he will be indicted for murder. Emmett Till informs Jeremy that he and Sarah are able to communicate because they are supposed to not only help each other, but to make a change upon the world. The paranormal functions within Ghost Boys as a form of revision.